So we're discussing today the last part of the chapter, Love Hurts, the negative project of psychoanalysis. And as you remember, I promised to talk of what could it be the negative project of psychoanalysis, seen as political or social project. And I start with McGovern thinking, who actually tries to rely on Freud late insight of the centrality of the importance of death drive, of its central role. And he, unlike other Freudo-Marxists who combine critical theory and Freud, McGovern actually starts with the death drive. He tries to be faithful to actually late Freud, so meaning without seeing the death drive as a secondary or as obstacle, but actually proceeding from the late Freud. What would it be? Social consequences, the social project of based on late Freud, not on early Freud, as it's usually done, and which is easier to do. And he claimed that so this kind of psychoanalysis as a social project won't be functioning as the healing, as the therapy. First of all, it's not a clinic. It's kind of the way I see it, it's negative social practice. It doesn't mean that society, everyone in society would undergo psychoanalysis or something like that, but psychoanalysis would be functioning, or this negative, what I call negative insight of psychoanalysis. Basically, for McGovern, it's insight that the lack is structural, can never be filled. It's there to stay, so it can never be saved, something like it. And if we really accept it, and the society that we're going to have based on this late Freud, the social project based on late Freud psychoanalysis, McGovern claims it's not a better society, nor it would entail less suffering. It's something different. It's not aimed for salvation. So it's the subjects that are deprived of the hope to fulfill the lack. They're hopeless subject. It's not the psychotherapeutic society anymore, because therapy is based on the idea that lack has to be filled, that we have to be saved, or something has to be improved, or there's supposed to be less suffering. It's something else, not society aiming at salvation, but doing something else, or not doing anything even. But and generally Freudo-Marxists, they don't like practice, psychoanalytic practice, because they see it as a part of exploitation and part of therapeutic society, but they like Freudian theory. It's just McGovern likes late Freud, and me, I like late Freud theory much more than the early one. But the problem, as you know, with McGovern is that his general, this part that discloses his general framework of thinking is framework that still secures enjoyment. So he, with his project, he still talks about the possibility of maybe not ultimate enjoyment, the one we try to seek, is positively oriented, but at least realistic, trying to secure a realistic enjoyment. And this is for him the reason why he have to embrace the loss. So at least he's presenting that way. So it is not better, it's not less suffering, but at least this is how the enjoyment functions, something that presupposes suffering, and that's all we can get. So for me, you cannot talk about enjoyment if you're talking about negative project of actually genuinely negative project of psychoanalysis, because once again, if you mention enjoyment, it's the wrong thing to mention here. It still becomes a positive project. It's still aimed at enjoyment, maybe not ultimate enjoyment without suffering, deprived of suffering, but it's still about enjoyment, securing realistic enjoyment. And that's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is a social bond, a genuine social bond, and even if it doesn't bring enjoyment. So the subjects in the society that is the result maybe of the negative project of psychoanalysis, so just negatively oriented society, would come to embrace luck, loss as structural, as this nothingness in between that connects. And my question would be, can we actually be connected on the level of this loss and without covering it with ideology? Meaning, we normally in society, in interpersonal relationship on any level, we structure them through ideology, meaning through aiming at better future. Like, for example, through creating world, making it a better place, or we are connecting through some devoting ourselves to projects that will fix some problems in the world, or through our identities, or through because of certain advantage of the connection, or because of certain utility. So it's ideology that we connect in through the covering this lack that is structural. Through we are normally connecting positively, aiming for salvation. You know, if it doesn't work, if this lack is revealed too obviously, it presupposes a kind of disconnection. So my question would be, is it the negative project of psychoanalysis would be actually trying to connect through embracing the lack as structural, same as for McGovern, and it would be the genuine connection, the actual connection of disillusioned subjects that we can call them the subjects of death drive. And McGovern would call the subject in this kind of society, the one that follows or embraces the late Freud insight or negative insight, would be a hopeless subject. And for him, this subject is revolutionary because the ideology is not able to operate on the subject, because he lost or she lost hope, and therefore they are emancipated from ideology, and they recognize luck as unredeemable, something that is not possible to fulfill, and therefore ideology cannot be driven by ideology. They don't buy what ideology sells. And this would be the hopeless subject, would be the emancipated subject, the negative subject. They don't believe in the promises of ideology anymore. And but paradoxically, this can be the basis of a genuine connection with the other. So through the lack that we all share as structural in the social bond, and as structural for the subject as such. And so for McGovern would point out more of the tragic nature of this hopeless subject, the subject as tragic hero, the way he would call him, the one who is embracing the loss or embracing the lack, and acting not in order to bring a better future, meaning to fulfill the lack, but out of embracing this lack. It's hard to imagine, because actually why would one act? Because you need to be motivated by something. Maybe it's more absurd motivation. Motivation is the absence of motivation, but it's hard to actually imagine. And for me, what is more important is that it's probably not tragic hero, but it's comic hero, we could say, because, and here I rely on Simon Critchley, who would point out that tragedy is not tragic enough, and the comedy is a real tragedy. What he means is that tragedy is not tragic enough because you have a reward being called or celebrated for being heroic, for being tragic hero. And comic situation doesn't presuppose this transgression of tragedy. There is no reward in being called comic. You cannot be comic hero. You can be, but it's like each part of the phrase comic hero negates the other one. It doesn't make sense. It's not comedian is not hero. So Creechley, who is talking about comedy as actual tragedy, he would claim that unlike in existential thinking of the tragedy of existence, where you have to embrace anxiety or something like that, you have a reward, you are appointed as a tragic hero. For example, you get authenticity in Heidegger. And if in a comedy, if you're comic hero, you're getting nothing. It's more like embracing the non-identity than not being a hero, not getting any reward out of your tragedy. So it's more tragic than tragedy. The comedy is more tragic than tragedy itself. And it's interesting to think of a comedy as one of the example of the possible examples of negative practice, humor and laughter as one of those practices, because if it's at least certain type of humor might be seen as practice of embracing the lack, the constitutive lack, and coinciding, sharing it with the others. Again, not all kind of laughter works like that, because there is laughter that presupposes one's superiority, the one who laughs and someone who is laughed at. But other types of laughter can be seen in this way. So it can be seen that laughter can be seen as revealing the non-coincidence, or according to incongruity theory of the laughter, when we laugh because our expectations are ruined, meaning we discover when we laugh and we find someone funny, it means that we discover the absurdity of at the basis that constitutes reality, that it's this non-coincidence or non-congruence, and it causes us laugh. Creechley, in his book on humor, would also write that when we laugh, we are not possessing ourselves, we're not in charge of ourselves. So it's something that possesses us, which also means the losing ourselves. And joke is something that is shared with others, so others stop belonging to themselves too. This is when the absurd, tragic even part of the reality is revealed, and we coincide with the lack as structural for us. And perfect comedy would include laughing on oneself. This is discovering the inauthenticity, pathetic sides of one existence, and others who laugh at this joke, you're kind of sharing this nothingness, the pathetic side of your existence with others. Plus, you don't belong to yourself when you laugh. So this all can be seen as the negative practice of coinciding with the lack as structural for social bond and for the subject, and through this with others. Kind of when you laugh and you include yourself, and it's not out of superiority, feeling of superiority, kind of not the sexist joke or racist joke, but actual the good joke. You discover through it the absurd part of your existence, of existence as such, and other relate to itself. So it happens here. Okay. And so this how comedy can be seen as first real tragedy, and second as the negative practice, not exactly of psychoanalysis, but negative in psychoanalytic, more or less existential interpretation. When we fall into this kind of void, and through this we connect with each other. Sometimes, well, not sometimes, but it's more or less common thing to associate laughter as itself with pleasure and reward, but I don't recommend doing it. At least I'm not doing it. It's not necessary that this is pleasure. Pleasure can be seen as secondary, as a way to analyze laughter. It's not necessarily pleasurable, meaning it can be, I can question if it's pleasurable. So it's not necessary. It's normal practice to think that the laughter is pleasurable, that therefore you get a reward, meaning reward is not falling with a lack, but I just consider claiming that pleasure comes as a secondary analysis of laughter, and to feel up this way that this is pleasurable, just in case the possibility to preserving it, understanding it as as negative practice. And at the end, I would claim what I like psychoanalysis for, and the form that I like psychoanalysis of psychoanalysis is the late Freud, precisely because Freud got disillusioned in psychoanalytic cure, the late Freud after 1920. And this kind of part of psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic practice, after late Freud, after his disillusionment, I find it authentic, we can call it psychoanalysis, or I find authentic, whatever I like, I call it authentic, and negative. So the psychoanalysis that is disillusioned in itself, and it can be seen as comic. So it's practice, but Freud discovered that it doesn't work, but it still functions. So it functions as a comic practice, tragic practice, as a breakdown of itself. We can even say that it coincides with its own death drive. If you see death drive as self-sabotaging mechanism, it functions after late Freud in negation of itself as something pathetic. It discovered its pathetic nature, and now it's just glitching instead of properly functioning, being aimed at cure like before. Now there is no cure, but still something is happening. The disillusionment of itself, and this any work of psychoanalysis is not the cure. It's just the parody maybe of a cure, or farce. And it's different from more or less conventional perspective on psychoanalysis, that they would try to do what early Freud failed to do, to make psychoanalysis actually work as a therapeutic practice. I don't care about this kind of psychoanalysis that is competing with other therapies. For me, just the part of therapeutic society, no claiming that it can heal the subject or improve lives. This is not what is my interest. My interest is precisely the one where you discover that you cannot heal anyone, even if it was initially your only goal. And this is what I like, and this is what I find sincere and authentic about it. And yeah, this is the negative practice, or negative psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis it is not offering cure, or if it's offering cure, it's also failing. It's like cure of the absence of a cure, not cure that secures realistic enjoyment. There's nothing about enjoyment here. It's not aimed at even realistic enjoyment. If it's aimed at realistic enjoyment of some kind of enjoyment, it fails. And so it functions as strategy and as a comedy at the same time. And it's not necessary that I'm interested in negative psychoanalysis. It's just negative practice as such. It's just this part of psychoanalysis that I like when it functions as a breakdown of itself. And in this breakdown of itself and still functioning, I find it similar to how a genuine human bond functions as a failure of itself. So it's not necessary, negative practice is not necessary psychoanalytic practice. It's just this part of psychoanalysis that is that I like, and I can call, because of that, negative practice. But we can imagine it outside of psychoanalysis and any other, an existential, for example, therapy, or existential kind of existential practice. It would involve working with the lack, or embracing maybe lack, or doing something with it. And the world of the future, will we going to be all cancelled by each other and be living dead without any hopes? There is the chance maybe that will still, so when ideology won't be able to work, either because we're so smart, because we don't believe it anymore, just not able to believe anymore, but just have no motivation left. I'm just wondering if it's possible to sustain bond without the ideology, without especially with our therapeutic ideology that is aimed to fix us and that is aimed to fix society. What if it's not possible? Would it we still be together? And at the same time, I think that once we disillusioned, we might actually be together because there is nothing else to share except for the lack and disillusionment. And probably we are getting there. All right, I'll stop sharing, I'll stop recording, and I ask you if you want to ask me questions.